It is possible, and the framers of the Kenyan Constitution, the Kenyan 2010 Constitution, envisioned such a scenario. A scenario where you don't appear on the ballot paper. It is even possible, 1 in a million chance, that you may have never voted in your life. That is why I say it is 1 in a million chance, because in Kenya, for you to have those positions, you have to have been voting and registered and so on. So, but on paper, it is possible for you to be the president of Kenya without having voted. And that is why I can say that it is possible that for Madam Wanga to be the president, to be the next president of Kenya without appearing on a ballot paper. And this is how it is. And even after indicating how it is possible using Kenyan constitution, I'm also going to give you an example of another country, that is the US, and what actually happened. Remember, our constitution heavily borrows from the American presidential constitution. So this is a way that somebody in this time we can say Madam Wanga can be the president of the country and the commander-in-chief of Kenya Defense Forces without appearing on the ballot. We start off with the impeachment. I know Gachagua, even after being impeached, he will still go to the Supreme Court. But I know that in the Supreme Court is going to lose. So we are going to have a long-drawn war. That is what I wanted to say. We will have a long-drawn war whereby the fight will not end in the Senate. Remember Kawira Mwangaza? She was impeached in the Senate, but still she went to court. But then, let us say Gachagua goes to court, he loses the case. He goes to the Supreme Court, he loses the case, and then William Samoei Arap Ruto is allowed. Now, what happened according to the Constitution of Kenya? The 2010 Constitution of Kenya allows the president to nominate anybody so long as that person has qualifications to be the president. He will nominate that person and take that person's name to the legislature for approval. Once the person is approved, the person is sworn in, and the person moves into Hustler's Mansion in Karen. That is the 2010 Constitution. The previous Constitution said that once the president dies, or I've used the wrong word. Once the position of the president is vacant, then the vice president will be sworn in as the president for 90 days, pending a new election for the president. So the vice president will be president for 90 days, pending an election for the new president. But if the vice president, for any reason, he is unable or unwilling to act as the president, then the cabinet will appoint one of them to be the acting president for 90 days. That is the old constitution, but it is no longer there. The current constitution, which heavily borrows from the American system, as I will show you later, is that once the seat of the deputy president is vacant for any reason, this is how it goes. And which are the reasons? One, it can be vacant because the occupier dies. 2, it can be vacant because the occupant is sick and his sickness is such that it affects his function of the sickness now makes it not possible for him to properly function in his or her function as a deputy president. Or the deputy president can resign, can die, so there are so many ways that makes the seat of the seat of the deputy president be vacant. In this case, we are referring to impeachment of Gachagua. Now that it has become, when it reaches a time when it is vacant, then the president appoints anybody, so long as the person has the following qualifications: that the person is a registered voter in Kenya, and the person is over 35 years. Why is it registered in Kenya? It shows that that is a Kenyan citizen. You cannot vote in Kenya if you are not a citizen of Kenya. And then they have said that you have to be a registered voter. It means that those people who are Kenyan citizens, but they decided not to appear on the voters' roll, then they cannot be selected there. And why is it? It is 35 years and over? Because the Constitution, since 1966, the Constitution says you have to be 35 years and over. It was placed there at 35 years old because by that time Tom Mboya was not yet 35, so they wanted to place there a condition that should Jomo Kenyatta die in 1966, then Tom Mboya cannot vie for the presidency. And remember, if Tom Mboya was 35 and whatever, it is said that if the president died that time, the vice president took over, or if the vice president did not or was not willing to take over, then any member of the cabinet. So here is when you find people like Tom Mboya, that they would find a way. You know, there are so many things that happen behind the camera. So at that time, he could somehow convince the vice president not to accept that, and then they convince the cabinet to appoint him. Now we are back to this constitution, the 2010. It says that if the seat of the deputy president is vacant for any reason, and we have said the reasons that can make it be vacant, then the president will nominate a qualified person and the legislature will accept. Now, let us assume that person is you, me, or even Madam Gladys Wanga. Remember, the person who has been made the deputy president did not, okay, you may have appeared on ballot paper for any other position other than the presidency. And when we come to the Americans example, I'll give you that example when it so happened. So you find that basically you'll not have appeared on ballot paper because you appeared on ballot paper for another position and not for the position of the presidency. So that person becomes that as the deputy president. And then before the general election or before the end of this term, the position, the seat of the president falls vacant. It falls vacant for various reasons. It can fall vacant when he himself decides not to continue even for a single day. He can resign. It can fall vacant when his medical condition makes it possible that the president cannot function as the president of the republic. It may even be an act of God. So there are so many reasons that can make that vacancy. And you find that the deputy president who did not appear on the ballot paper and who was just appointed would find himself or herself as the president. Now, it happened in America, whereby Gerald Ford, you see, the president was Richard Nixon. You remember the story of the Watergate. You remember the story of the Watergate. You find that Gerald Ford was an MP. Gerald Ford was an MP, or what we can call in Kenya, MNA, member of the National Assembly. He was not even a senator. He was not even a governor, but he ended up as a president in a few months. Now he was a Republican like Richard Nixon, and what happened was that in the Senate, no, in the House of Congress, he was the leader of minority, meaning that even though this thing is a bit hard to explain to Africans, in African countries, finding that the president is his party is not the majority in the parliament, it's a bit hard for Africans to understand. But Nairobians will understand, because the governor for Nairobi, Johnston Sakaja, his party, that is UDA or even Kenya Kwanza, is the minority in the county assembly of Nairobi. So you find that Nairobi, the leader of majority is from ODM, or could we say Azimio. So you find that UDA stroke Kenya Kwanza, UDA stroke Kenya Kwanza are the minority. So the leader of UDA or Kenya Kwanza in Nairobi City County is the leader of minority. So it also happened that way in the House of Congress, that at that time, when the seat of the vice president was vacant, um, the leader of minority in the House of Congress was Gerald Ford. It was Gerald Ford who was the leader of minority in the House of Congress. So he was elected in the same way I've just said before, and then he was elected as a vice president. And then a few months later, the president, Richard Nixon himself, resigned and Gerald Ford was made the president. Now, how did it come? In 1968, Richard Nixon was the presidential candidate for the Republican Party, and his running mate was Spiro Agnew. His running mate was Spino Agnew. They stayed there for 4 years, that is 1968 to 1972. In 1972, during the second term, Richard Nixon again contested for the second and final term. He still had Spiro Agnew as his running mate. Spiro Agnew was the vice president, so he was still the running mate. In that year, 1972, there was a primary. There was a primary to select a running no to select the presidential candidate. Yeah, to select a presidential candidate. These things have changed, not by law but by practice, because nowadays, if you are the president of the USA and it reaches a time when you want to run for the second term, they do not have a party primary. You are just accepted. You remember even recently, uh, President Biden was accepted even without any competition. So it happens that in America, through practice, if you are the president and you want to run for the second term, your parties don't hold a primary. But in 1972, there was primaries for the Republican Party. There are those people who are very strong, Vigogo Wachama of the Republican Party. These people contested against Richard Nixon. And you see the problem with having strong contestants, munakosana. So their relationship was not good with Richard Nixon. So even though Richard Nixon still wanted to have Spiro Agnew as his running mate. So during that campaign, Spiro Agnew never participated actively. He never participated actively in the campaigns. Just like today, if you go to YouTube and then type there latest presidential whatever, you'll find that the two candidates, they are all over, and you'll also find that their running mates are either with them or the running mates have also got their campaign huku na huko. But Spiro Agnew was not campaigning, and there was even a rumor that Nixon may drop him. But the reason Nixon did not drop him was that those people who are very strong Republicans and whatever, they had run against him during the primaries and the relationship was not so good. But then, come 1972, they won the elections. Actually, they won the election with the highest margin. Remember, how many delegates do they win? I don't know. But you're supposed to get 270, isn't it? But what the Democratic people got, the Democratic candidate got 17 candidates, yeah. And Nixon, I think he got 520, yes, 520 delegates in the elections of 1972. That is what Nixon got. I think that is the highest ever, if not one of the highest ever. So he got that, a lot of votes. And the competitor got very few. The reason being that even in the Democratic Party, there was a lot of you know when you fight a civil war, you fight so much that you lose. So that the candidate who was called George McGovern got one of the least delegates in the history of the American elections. Those two people were elected. That is Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew was sworn in as the vice president. But you see, Spiro Agnew had a case. He had a case similar to Trump. But you see, some of these things, Trump ana vitu mingi. Because it is said that Trump does not pay for so many years. He does not pay the federal taxes. Spiro was special investigators were investigating the vice president Agnew Spiro of tax evasion. It reached somewhere in 1973, a few months after being sworn in, reached a place where he entered an agreement. He entered an agreement with the special prosecutor that if he were to resign, then he would not be prosecuted. That was a conditional resignation. They accepted. Then he resigned. He resigned for the purpose of not being, if he would have been taken to court while he was the vice president and found guilty, he would still be taken, he would be jailed. And so, and also maybe he saw he had a very, very strong points which he would be easily be convicted and jailed. So he entered a plea bargain for him to be, to resign and that he should not be charged in court. So when he resigned, Richard Nixon used the 25th Amendment where he went and selected Gerald Ford. He went and selected Gerald Ford. That is a few months after he was elected. He chose Gerald Ford, forwarded the name to the legislature, and Gerald Ford was accepted as the vice president and he was sworn in. Then a few more months later, angekuwa Mluya, Mjaluo ama Mkisinga, semekana huyu mtu ama Mkamba, huyu mtu ako na miti shamba mingi, atakuwaje anaenda hivyo. So a few months later, Nixon was Nixon resigned in the Watergate scandal. Nixon resigned in the Watergate scandal, and Gerald Ford became the president. Now, can I give that with a Kenyan example? Who is the leader of minority in the National Assembly? One person called Junet Mohammed. That is the position that Gerald Ford held. And Nixon later said that he chose Gerald Ford because of this. We have some politicians, even here, we have some politicians who may be in that party. Allow me to suggest a politician like Tim Wanyonyi. We have politicians like Tim Wanyonyi, whom if he had to stand for any position, he is respected across all political leanings. He is accepted along. So, assuming that Wanyonyi, Timothy Wanyonyi, is the leader of minority in parliament. So, the reason why he was selected to be the vice president was none other. It was nothing to do with him being this or that. But Richard Nixon just wanted somebody who could be accepted by all parties to become the vice president. So he was sworn in and he became the vice president. And that was 1973. Yeah, and then that was 1973. Then immediately, a few months later, that is why I'm using the word immediately. A few months later, uh, the Watergate scandal came, and it forced uh, it forced um, it forced President Richard Nixon to resign. Now here is somebody who became a president for 3/4 of the term. He became the vice president for 3/4 of the term without even appearing on the ballot paper. As I finish off, I want to explain what Watergate scandal was. And there are some things that people do that are stupid, which are not necessary and whatever. Because as people are approaching 20, no, we are so used to say 20. As people are approaching the 1972 elections, it was obvious that Richard Nixon was very popular and he would easily win the election. You can see that he had, is it 520 delegates? And the fellow got 27. So these are, it was his for the taking. But a decision was made to spy on other people. If I remember very well, Bunge, there is this, next to Bunge Tower, there is this house that occupies the offices of MPs that used to be called Continental House, if I'm not wrong. Now, Continental House, yeah. If anything happens, a scandal happens in that Continental House, because that Continental House used to be the headquarters of Democratic Party, yeah, Kibaki. Now, if anything happens in the Continental House, that people will call it the Continental Scandal. So these people, the opposition party, had rented offices in a house that was called Watergate. The house was called Watergate. It had, I mean, maybe it was a company for water, maybe whatever. Just like Continental, does it have to go to connected to continent? But then buildings have got names. Buildings have got names, and that building was called Watergate. Now, Watergate was just like Continental House used to be the headquarters of Democratic Party before it was bought by Parliament. The same way, Watergate was the headquarter for the opposition party. And whenever they used to meet there, Richard Nixon used the Secret Service he used the Secret Service to go, and the members of his staff to go and place their hidden microphones in Watergate House, just like when Kibaki was head of Democratic Party and he was at Continental House. Then Moi would send people to go and place their hidden microphones so that when Democratic Party, yeah, it is funny because Kibaki's is Democratic, and even the party that was there that that was being bagged was also called Democratic. Is also called Democratic Party. So that when Democratic Party are meeting and discussing, they already recordings, and these people will know what they are going to do. The secret plans they are saying, oh, this is how we are going to win this state. This is how we are going to campaign this way. The other one, no. So these things were done, and Richard Nixon approved for the use of the taping. And you see, I do not know. Maybe I'll remember and write it on the comment section. It happens that there's a time it reached there where they said that the Oval Office has a tape. Oval Office has a tape, and anytime the president want to talk with anybody there, the tape usually do what? Is set on. So it reached a place where these people who are recording, in the Watergate, used to come and brief the president. And as normal, everything that the president talked within the Oval Office was recorded in audio. So when these people are investigating, those people who went and placed the bags were jailed. Others resigned and such a thing. But then it came to a question of, did the president know? Did the president participate in whatever? So it reached a place and said, there is a probability that the president discussed those things with, there's a probability that the president discussed those things with the plotters inside the Oval Office. So they said, okay, let us go for the tapes in the Oval Office. But then Richard Nixon knew that the tapes being found, he'll be found guilty. So he refused to hand over the tapes. That is why you hear people talking of the White House. I know the Watergate tapes. He refused to hand it over, and then people started mandamano. He must resign, and he must resign, and really he resigned. Thank you.